Hi, thanks for joining us and tuning back in. We wanted to bring a very special, quick conversation. There's been a lot of activity in the last 24 hours. And so we wanted to bring back a good friend, John, to kind of help explain what has happened and what's taking place and maybe give us a little bit more insight and understanding here. So without further ado, John, how are you doing, sir?
Jay, good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time to come back. I really do appreciate it. Your knowledge and your way of explaining this is always greatly appreciated. I kind of just want to jump into it, and I want to help people understand how this all began. So before we jump into the report that was just released, can we back up just a touch and talk about the stage that led to the report being written and explored even to begin with? Can you back up and give us a little history on that?
Yeah, well, on Saturday past, myself and hundreds of other people gathered in the Ormeau Road to remember the 30th anniversary of the attack on the bookmakers on the Ormeau Road, which led to many people getting injured and the murder of five individuals, the youngest of which was 15. So it was an event, like so many, that stayed with people. I mean, I was 12 when that happened. It was a couple of years after my own dad was killed, but it was an event that really jumped out. It was an event in itself that came at the end of a very bloody week in Belfast. We had an off-duty RUC man go into Sinn Féin's offices on the Falls Road and shoot dead 3 people. And then a couple of days later, we had the attack on the bookies, and there were other attacks as well that week. So it was a very bloody time in Belfast. And it was a very bloody time for South Belfast, particularly. The Catholic community and the nationalist community were being targeted for assassination. And really, you know, I could be talking about so many other different areas because the pattern is the same. From the very early stages of all of these attacks and all of these murders, the community and the families started asking questions. And they wanted to know the circumstances in which their loved ones died, how killers could drive in so freely and away again so freely and carry out these attacks. The attack on the bookmakers took place on a very busy part of urban Belfast on a Saturday afternoon. So I think what began for a lot of families was a journey that, in the context of today, led to them making a complaint, making an application to our Police Ombudsman. And our Police Ombudsman is a structure that has oversight of the police, and it has the ability to look into historic cases involving the RUC. And that's what led to this report, which covers 11 murders, 1 attempted murder over an 8-year period, I believe. That's what led to that report being given to the families yesterday, embargoed until today. And today we see the shocking revelations and conclusions. And I don't use that word lightly because I think the words can sometimes get cheapened when we look at our past, because I was equally shocked 2 weeks ago when we looked at a series of murders in the northwest of Ireland. And this comes on the back of lots of other reports, but it's no less damning and it's no less shocking.
Can you give us a little bit of what the report says, just bluntly?
There are multiple layers, even before we get to the time when killers walked into houses or walked into bookmakers and pulled the trigger. So for me, a lot of this in this particular report starts in the mid-1980s, whenever the British military, through one of their agents, a man called Brian Nelson, oversaw the importation of a shipment, not a box, not a couple of things smuggled under a pillow or a blanket, a shipment of weapons from apartheid South Africa into the north. And those weapons were distributed to loyalist groups. So this was all under the supervision of the British state. And up until that point, the killing capacity, to put it crudely, of loyalism wasn't great. It still impacted on people, but this shipment really was a game changer. And that's the word of loyalism itself. In later years, they would say this was a complete game changer for them. Their killing capacity tripled, and you see that very bluntly with the stats. And their weapons were distributed all across the north, and they were used These weapons were used in some of the most notorious incidents in the north that stay with people. The Loughlinisland massacre, as a group of Catholics were sitting watching the World Cup in America. The Greysteel massacre, where infamously 2 killers walked in and shouted trick or treat because it was Halloween and sprayed a bar. And also in the Bookmakers, where 5 people were shot dead. But also other weapons were secured from South Africa, and other weapons were secured from the police and the British Army themselves. We also had up at that point as well a number of loyalist killers being targeted by the police, not for arrest, not for prosecution or investigation, but being targeted because they were killers to become agents, to work for the police. And of the 8 informers, agents who were working for the police, they were responsible for 27 murders in South Belfast alone. That's what this report has said. It talks about a willful failure to keep records, an absence of accountability. It talks about really basic things, such as not informing people that that their lives were under threat. And I'll even just leave you with this, because into the report, a lot of this is multi-layered, but I mean, the report, or the review into my father's murder, Desmond de Silva pointed to the fact that if Catholics were under threat, the RUC were less likely to tell them because they couldn't be trusted, because it might inadvertently reveal the source of informers and agents. But if anybody was under threat from regards Republican groups, then they were told. So we're living at a time that if you were a Catholic in Belfast, in the north, and your life was under threat from loyalism, then more than likely you would not be told by the police. And one of the killings was of a woman called Teresa Clinton, a young mother whose daughter was actually on the radio today talking about how she never met her 4 grandchildren, whose husband at the time, Jim Clinton, who would be a very good friend of mine, wasn't warned despite repeated threats to his life. And the Ombudswoman talks about how even the simple passing on of that information may have led to Jim and Teresa taking actions that could have saved her lives. So the Ombudswoman talks about collusive behaviour, but make no doubt about it, in every one of the incidents that she looked at, collusion was present. It was front and centre.
So what's getting me right now, and what I'm just spinning on, is that you have a government report about the government colluding. This isn't an outside independent agency where it could be painted as, oh, well, they're biased. It was written by Jay Hodges. He's obviously very biased. Yeah. Like, that's just the way, like, this is a government report that looked into a government's actions and has said, these are all the horrible things that were going on that, and everybody knew about it. It wasn't a secret. Like, it's just so shocking. And the other thing that keeps getting me is, and I always talk about this, but it isn't that long ago. No. I was in high school when these murders were taking place, and it's, we have a tendency to distance ourselves from it by thinking of it as being something that occurred so long ago, and that is just not simply the case. And you mentioned Greysteel and Loughlinisland and the bookies, and just kind of how all of those things are together. I'm curious as to what this means now. Like, what does this report do, and what does it do moving forward? Like, you've got this report, but there are other reports that have come out that have said that have said the same thing. And so, just kind of what happens. It's not like there isn't a part of the government that's not acknowledging it. They did the report. The ombudsman works in the government and did the report. So what happens now? Like, where does it shift to?
Yeah, you're right that this isn't a partisan report. This is a report that is from a state body. It's a report that is subject to legal challenge and legal scrutiny. So therefore, it is a document which has had a lot of time invested in it to make sure that all of the conclusions can be stood over. Where it goes is important. Also, at the time, is important as well. The 1990s, we were talking about a peace process. We were talking about ceasefires. We had that culminate in the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. But up until that point, and I think a question needs to be asked as to why the police, why the security services, why the state would increase the killing capacity of groups at a time when, with the benefit of hindsight, we know how close we were to the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. But where we go with this is also really important. The South Belfast families have got a degree of truth in this report. I say a degree, and a very strong degree, because it's not the complete picture, because a lot of RUC personnel at the time refused to cooperate. A lot of records were destroyed, and the Police Ombudsman, as the name would suggest, only has the capacity to look at the actions of the police. It wouldn't have the ability or the legal capacity to look into MI5 or British military intelligence. And I think that's the key here, because once we start to piece the different parts of the jigsaw together, so, you know, let's take a couple of examples: South Belfast, North Belfast, West Belfast, Mid-Ulster, the northwest of the island, South Down. You start to put those pieces together, then what you're seeing is not the system failing in a certain part of the north. What you're seeing, and I said this earlier today, the Ombudswoman rightly talks about failings, police failings. Police fail to keep records, police fail to arrest, police fail to capitalise on forensic opportunities. You talk about failings. Police continued to employ and reward and protect known killers. Now, it's right as we sit today and call that a failing. It was right to call it a failing in the 1990s as well, but the point is that it wasn't a failing back then. This was the system working perfectly. This was the system doing what it was designed to do. Collusion was very much a policy that was implemented across the board without any, without any protection for anybody. If your life was not as important as the role that an agent played, then it was a very simple decision. You weren't warned. You were targeted for assassination. Sometimes weapons would be supplied to the killers. Safe passage to and from the location would be supplied. And then after that, not only would there be no investigation, but anybody who uttered the words collusion was targeted and painted as a Republican sympathizer. I mean, I've talked about this before. You know, at the time of the attack on the bookies, we were starting to ask questions of the British government and the state around collusion in the murder of my father. And it was a very toxic place. To simply say the word collusion, you were looked at in a certain way. The RUC were vehemently opposed to anybody who dared criticise any of the conduct of their officers. And of course, what we know now is that it was rife right across the board. Even those officers who were trying to investigate the murder. I'm thinking of my father's example. I'm thinking of other murders example. So if CID were dealing with a murder investigation and thought, well, here we go, there's person A, B, and C that we want to arrest and interview. Then Special Branch came in and either prevented those arrests from taking place or made sure that any forensic or evidential leads would be destroyed, and therefore the investigation was pretty much dead from the offset. So that was the system that we lived through. That was the system that a lot of people didn't live through. And where we go now is that there needs to be a refocus on having a process that allows family to access truth and access justice. I'm talking to you today from Westminster. I've just met one of the NIO ministers, and I'm about to go into a meeting with the Shadow Secretary of State. And what myself and the other Sinn Féin MPs are impressing upon them is that to pull the curtain down, to prevent any other families getting the report that's been published today, or to prevent any other family having the type of result and satisfaction and cathartic impact that the Ballymurphy families, for argument's sake, had last year, to prevent families across the board from accessing that is wrong. It's cruel. It will set back reconciliation, and it also won't work, because we have seen that time and time again that the British state's energy going into preventing truth and preventing justice, it just delays families' process and progress, but it doesn't kill it completely. And I mean, I want to pay testament and tribute to the families. Their dedication, their perseverance, their dignity is absolutely second to none. And I think that what we will see from this is more families being focused on getting truth and justice for themselves as well.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on and give us a couple of minutes explanation. I think it really helps us to understand what we're seeing in the news and just kind of what's being out there. I certainly also want to thank you for everything that you continue to do. Your life and service is something to be admired. And I very much appreciate everything that you work for every single day. I don't want to keep you. I know you've got to get to your next meeting. So let me just say thank you. And we will be looking forward to having you on again to talk about this more in depth and further as this continues to develop.
Thanks very much, Jay.
Thank you so much. Once again, thank you to John for coming on and giving us his time. It was incredibly valuable. And then also, this is one of those things that people need to be talking about in the States. So when you see it, when you watch it, share it, push it around. Everybody knows people that they need to be pushing this to, but knowledge is going to be very beneficial as we move forward. So please do share it wide. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.